today we're looking at this topic, the organisms and their environment. We're looking at this topic, organisms and their environment. And this topic includes the food chain, the food webs, and the energy that's being used in the whole ecosystem of the environment. Now, without wasting time, let's listen to this tutorial and then we get back to business, okay? So let's listen to this tutorial for 1 minute.
This video is about the feeding relationships within food chains and food webs. Let's begin by explaining what a food chain is. The sun is the primary source of energy in most ecosystems. Plants are able to convert light energy from the sun into chemical energy during photosynthesis, which is then transferred to the organisms that consume the plants. Organisms that consume the plant-eating organisms will form the next link in a food chain to which energy is transferred. A food chain therefore shows the transfer of energy from one organism to the next, usually starting with a plant. Plants are known as producers because they can produce their own food during photosynthesis, while animals are called consumers because they must consume other organisms as a source of food. Primary consumers are the first consumers in a food chain, and they will eat plants. Animals that consume the primary consumers are called secondary consumers, while tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers. Animals that feed on tertiary consumers are called quaternary consumers, and they usually form the last link in most food chains. When plants and animals die, their bodies must be broken down to release the chemical elements they contain so that it can be recycled in the ecosystem. This is done by decomposers, which include bacteria and fungi, and these organisms therefore get their energy from the dead and waste organic material that they break down. Let's look at an example of how to construct a simple food chain when given the names of a series of organisms. Always start your food chain with the plant or producer, not the sun. In this example, the grass seeds would represent the plant or producer, so it would be the first link in the food chain. Next, search for the consumer that would eat the grass seeds. In this example, the mouse would most likely eat the grass seeds, so it would represent the primary consumer in the food chain. The snake would eat the mouse, so it would be the next link representing the secondary consumer, while the eagle would be the tertiary consumer in this example, making up the last link in the food chain. Add in your arrows to represent the flow of energy. Remember that you do not need to draw pictures of the organisms in the food chain, only write their names. In an ecosystem, food chains are usually interconnected as most organisms will eat a variety of different foods. This network of interconnected food chains are called a food web, and they are a more realistic representation of the energy transfer occurring within an ecosystem. They are also useful at showing how a change in one population may affect others within the food web. Humans will often have a negative impact on food webs when populations are overharvested or when foreign species are introduced into an ecosystem. The knock-on effects of human impact on food webs may be long-lasting and very detrimental to the entire ecosystem. Make sure that you are able to interpret the information given in food webs as they are popular exam questions. Let's now look at an example of the type of question that you may encounter in an exam. You are given an example of a food web and asked to identify 2 tertiary consumers in the food web. For the second question, you must explain the impact it would have on the mussel population if prawns disappeared from the food web. Take a few minutes to come up with possible answers to these questions. For the first question, you need to identify where the tertiary consumers would be in the food web. Remember that they will be the third consumers in a food chain. This means the tertiary consumers in this food web would be lobsters, whelks, and crabs. Note that there are 3 possible answers here, of which you only need to write down 2. For the second question, you need to think about the impact that the loss of prawns would have and how this may affect the mussel population. If prawns disappeared, then there would be less organisms feeding on small invertebrates. This would lead to an increase in their numbers. Mussels feed on small invertebrates, so their numbers would therefore increase, since they would have more food to consume. On the other hand, if prawns disappeared, then the seagulls would have lost a source of food. This may lead to a decrease in mussel numbers, as the seagulls would eat more mussels to compensate for the loss of prawns as a food source. Note that you only need to explain one of these scenarios as the mark points are paired. In summary, A food chain shows the transfer of energy from one organism to the next, starting with the producer. The arrows represent the direction in which energy is transferred. Producers make their own food during photosynthesis, while consumers must consume other organisms. Consumers may be classified as primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary, based on their position in a food chain. All dead organic material or waste products are broken down by decomposers. A food web is a network of interconnected food chains due to the fact that organisms have a variety of different food sources. Don't forget to check out all our other fantastic revision resources here.
Okay, you're welcome again. Now let's take a look at what we have looked at. We say first of all, this topic has something to do with the transfer of energy. Remember, all energy comes from the sun. Primary energy that we use in our environment comes from the sun. Okay, this energy is used by the plants, which is the primary producer, to make their food. Now, when the plant manufactures its own food, this food is consumed by the plants and also consumed by other organisms, such as the consumers. Now, these consumers, the primary consumer usually, feed from the plants, and these primary consumers are again being consumed by other organisms, which are being eaten by other tertiary consumers. First, primary consumers, they eat from the producers, and then the secondary consumers eat the primary consumers, and the tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers, and then even there's quaternary consumers that eat the tertiary consumers, and then when all of this, even from the producer to the quaternary consumers, when they die, they be decomposed. So they are decomposers that will add their chemical energy in their body into the soil for energy. You know, we say energy cannot be lost, can only be transferred from one form to another. The energy can be conserved and be used later for the uses. So some of the terminology we've looked at here in this energy and the organisms and the environment, some of the terminology we're looking at is that we've said that energy can be transferred from the primary source, which is the sun. So the whole of this topic, the primary source of energy is the sun. The sunlight energy is being used by plants. The plants, they trap the sunlight energy and they harness it and harvest it and use it to manufacture their whole food. You know, and without this energy, the plants cannot be able to photosynthesize. So the carbon dioxide that they take from the air into the leaves and the water that comes from the roots of the plant into the leaves, they cannot combine, they cannot chemically react together to produce the food, the glucose, unless there is a sunlight energy. And this sunlight energy is possible to be trapped because there is chlorophyll in the chloroplast of the plant cell. So when this is done, then the plant is able to manufacture its own food. Now this food is being consumed by other organisms, like the plants, like the locusts, the caterpillars, the grasshoppers, and all of this, which are primary consumers. And these primary consumers probably eaten by rats or mouse, and this rat or mouse are being eaten by other organisms, and so on and so forth. So we're going to look at the classes. We're going to look at the classes, the type of web that we have in the food chain. Okay, we're going to look at it. So when we say a food chain, we're going to start with simply saying the types of food chain. We have different types of food chain. But before I enter the types of food chain, let me quickly say, in the consumer, there are three types of consumers. We have three types, apart from, we say, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Apart from that, the consumer itself, they are classified into three groups. We have the herbivores, the carnivores, and the omnivores. The herbivores are those animals that feed on grasses, that feed on plants, they eat plants. Those organisms or animals that gets its energy by eating plants. Those organisms or animals that gets their energy from eating plants. That's herbivores. Now the second categories of consumers is the carnivore. The carnivores are those animals that gets its energy by eating other animals. Carnivores are those we should give you an example. Herbivores like goats, sheep, and all of this, cow, they are herbivores. Okay, carnivores are those animals that gets its energy by eating other animals like the dog and lions and tiger and all of these things. They get their energy by eating other animals. These are the carnivore in the food chain group. And then we have the omnivores, where we belong, human being, where we belong. The omnivores are those groups of animals that feed on both plants and animals. They eat plants and other animals. That's where human being belongs. We eat plants, we also eat animals. So we are omnivores. So these are the primary types, the three major types or classes of the consumers. We have three classes of consumers. Okay? So apart from the fact that we say we have primary consumers, which are usually the herbivores, they feed on the producers, the plants directly. And we have secondary consumers, which are usually predators. They feed on the primary consumers. And then we have what we call the tertiary consumers. The tertiary consumers, which are also predators that feed on the secondary consumers. And then we have the composers, like bacteria and fungi, that gets their energy from the decaying bodies of the plants or animal in the food chain, in the ecosystem. Okay? So in all of this, energy is transferred. The first thing we see here is that energy is being transferred from the sun, okay, to the plants. These are plants, these are grasses, okay. The sunlight energy is being trapped by the plants, and the mouse, they feed on these grasses, and then the owl feed on the mouse. So this is how energy is being transferred. So this one is showing the feeding relationship, that the plant is eaten by the mouse and the mouse is eaten by the owl. So you can see the grass is eaten by, this arrow means eaten by. So this grass is eaten by mouse and this mouse is eaten by owl. So a simple representation of showing the flow of energy in between organisms in the environment is simply called a food chain. Okay, a simple diagrammatical representation of feeding relationship between organisms in the environment, okay, is called a food chain. Okay, so we in the food chain, we say a food chain shows the transfer of energy from one organism to another. The transfer of energy from one organism to another. A food chain is simply the transfer of energy from one organism to another by starting with the producers. The source of all the energy in the food chain comes from the sunlight, comes from the sun. The source of all the energy from the food chain is the light energy from the sun. So this is the source of the energy in any given food chain. And then we say that the arrow in the food chain shows the transfer of energy. Okay, when we say eaten by, it's simply showing the transfer of energy, how it moves from the producer to the primary consumer, to the secondary consumer, to the tertiary consumer, to the quaternary consumer, and to the decomposers. So this arrow is showing the transfer of energy in the entire trophic level in the food chain or food web. We're going to talk about the food web. Energy is transferred from one organism to another by ingestion. That's eating. You eat it and digested them. Okay, that's how it is. In the food chain above, let's take a look at this food chain. We have the position in the food chain. We have the producer. Okay, organism. A good example of a producer is a grass. Grass. They make its own food using energy from the sunlight in the process of photosynthesis. Grasses can manufacture their own food using the sunlight energy in the process known as photosynthesis. Well, then the second position is the primary consumers. A good example is the mouse, okay, which eats the producer, eats grasses. The secondary consumer is the third level position in the food chain, okay, secondary consumer, which is like barn owl, okay, it is the primary consumer. Okay, so this is a good example. Now let's go to a food web. What is a food web? A food web is a network of interconnected food chain. It's just a network of interconnected food chain. You can simply say it's the number of food chain formed by interlinking pattern, forming a web like the arrangement that we're showing below, like the arrangement as this. Okay, we say it's the number of food chains which form an interlocking pattern or forming a web in an arrangement as shown in this diagram. Okay, so we can say a food web is a network of interconnected food chain. Just say a network of interconnected food chain. How is that? Because here you have the grass here. This grass is eaten by this rabbit, and then this rabbit is eaten by folks. This is one food chain. Okay, this is one food chain which can end here. Okay, 3 level. The grass producer, the rabbit, which is primary consumer, the fox, which is secondary consumer. Okay, another food chain can happen here. Grass is eaten by earthworm, earthworm is eaten by frog, frog is eaten by fox. This is another food chain which have producers, primary consumers, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. We have another food chain here. Grass is eaten by earthworm, earthworm is eaten by frog, frog is eaten by hawk. Okay, which is another food chain. And then we have a straight one here. Grass is eaten by earthworm, earthworm is eaten by mouse, mouse is eaten by hawk. Okay, we have another way. Grass is eaten by earthworm, earthworm is eaten by mouse, and then the mouse itself is eaten by fox. Another food chain. So this network of interconnectivity of food chain is what we call the food web. We have another one here. The grass is eaten by earthworm, earthworm is eaten by sparrow, sparrow is eaten by hawk. Okay, we have another food chain here. Grass is eaten by caterpillar, caterpillar is eaten by sparrow, and the sparrow is eaten by hawk. So this interconnectivity, or you have another one. Grass is eaten by earthworm, earthworm is eaten by frog, frog is eaten by hawk. Okay, this frog is eaten by this hawk. So it's a network of interconnectivity. So food webs are more realistic way of, because this is what the real environment we live in. This is what it is. A real environment is not just a food chain. A real environment we live in, where organisms live, it's an interconnectivity. It's an interconnections of different food chain, because organisms do not eat one food. Why do we have a food web? Because organisms do not eat one type of food. Organisms do not eat one type of food. So since they eat different types of food, then we can have an interconnection, a network of food chain put together, and that is called a food web. That's called a food web. So in a food web, you can be given one food web and they can ask you to write so many different types of food chain from it. Another question they can ask is that if they tell you if the rabbit dies or if the earthworm dies, how does it affect this whole food web? If the earthworm or decreases, if the number of earthworm decreases in Cambridge IGCSE, if the earthworm decreases, the number of earthworm decreases, how does it affect this? If earthworm decreases, then sparrow may reduce. The number of sparrow in the environment, in the ecosystem will reduce, because they will not have earthworm to feed on also, because the sparrow are not only feeding on the caterpillar, they also feeding on the earthworm. Okay, and then the mouse will reduce. Why? Number of mouse will decrease, because the earthworm, mouse are also feeding on the earthworm. Or mouse might even disappear if mouse are not feeding on any other thing, because if you see from here, mouse is not feeding on any other thing. It's always strongly feeding on the earthworm. So if this happens, the mouse might also disappear. And then if earthworm is gone, then the frog, it's a problem, the big problem, also decrease or almost disappear. Okay, so you can see the role of the earthworm in the ecosystem. So every of the organisms in the ecosystem is very important, because it's a source of food for another organism in the ecosystem. It's a source of food to another organism in the ecosystem. Okay, so let's move on quickly. We say food webs gives us lots more information about the transfer of energy in our real ecosystem. In the real ecosystem, food chain is just like a single demonstration. It's just a single demonstration. But the reality of the real life is a food web. It's a food web, because organisms do not feed on only one type of food. They feed on different types of food. Now, they also showed the interdependence. A food web also showed the interdependence, how organisms depend on different types of food. Okay, you can see that the sparrow depends on not only caterpillar, it also depends on the earthworm. It also depends on the earthworm. Okay, you can see how frog, how the mouse, or let's say the hawk depends on frog, depends on mouse, depends on sparrow. You can see how the hawk depends on 3 organisms here. It's 3 different organisms. It eats the frog, it eats the mouse, and it eats the sparrow. So you can see the interdependence. Okay, so you can see how the fox depend on frog, and also the fox depend on mouse, and also the frog depends on rabbit. So you can see the fox is also eating 3 different food in the food web. So this is the interdependence. You see, you can see how they interdependent and they're interconnected. Okay, we say, for example, in the food web above, the population of the earthworm decreased. If the population of the earthworm decreased, then the population of grass produced will decrease. Grass will increase also. If earthworm decrease, because among the things that are eating grass is caterpillar, earthworm, and rabbit. Caterpillar, earthworm, and rabbit. So if this one is no more there, then the grass will increase. Why? Because one of the organisms that is also feeding on it has reduced drastically. So since the number of organisms that are feeding on the grasses are reduced, then the grasses will be more. So that's one thing that will happen. Not the only thing. We say if the earthworm decrease, then the population of grass will decrease, as there are now fewer species that are feeding on the grass. Then the population of frogs and mouse will decrease significantly, because if this one dies or reduce, the frog and mouse, they are feeding on the earthworm. Frog, mouse, and sparrow. These three, they are feeding on the earthworm. They will reduce very drastically, if not even to extinction. But why this one sparrow will not go to extinction? Because sparrow is not only feeding on the earthworm, it's also feeding on the caterpillar. So you still have sparrow. Okay? But the frog and mouse will reduce very drastically, almost to extinction. They will reduce very drastically or almost to extinction. So sparrow will still be there because sparrow is feeding on caterpillar. But this mouse will be greatly affected, and the frog will also be greatly affected. So that's if anything happens if the earthworm decrease. So these are the questions that can logically come out for Cambridge IGCSE, to be able to explain what happens if something happens to one of the food in the ecosystem. Okay, the population of sparrow will decrease slightly. While sparrow will not decrease much like frog and mouse, because sparrow is also feeding on caterpillar. It will only decrease slightly, but not as much as the mouse and the frog, because sparrow is also feeding on caterpillar. Okay, so these are the things we need to show that we understood from the food web. Now, most of the changes in the populations of animals and plants happen as a result of human impact. What happens to the population actually happens from what we studied in chapter 20, the human impact on the environment. Because when we cut down the bushes, when we cut down, we kill animals, we kill organisms, we burn the bushes, burn everything, we begin to affect the other organisms in the ecosystem in our environment. We begin to affect the other organisms in the ecosystem in our environment. So most of the problems are caused by us, either by over-harvesting of the food species or by the introduction of forest species to a habitat. So either we over-harvest or we bring other things to the habitat. Due to interdependence, this can have a long-lasting knock on the effects on the environment throughout the food chain or the food web. Okay? Okay. Now let's quickly take a look at the pyramid. Okay, but before we go to the pyramid of numbers, we have different types of pyramid. We have pyramid of numbers. Okay, pyramid is just like a structure that is showing the number of quantity according to their size, according to their size in the ecosystem. So we're going to see, before we talk about the pyramid, we're going to look at this tutorial. Now, we have three different types of pyramid. We have pyramid of numbers, we have pyramid of biomass, and we have pyramid of energy. Okay, we're going to explain each of these: pyramid of numbers, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. But before we do that, let's quickly take a look at this tutorial once again.
This video is on the topic of food pyramids. Food pyramids are another way in which the ecological relationship between organisms of different trophic levels can be represented. The trophic level refers to the position of an organism in a food chain, food web, or food pyramid. There are different types of food pyramids that each represents a different component of the organisms at each trophic level. These include pyramids of numbers, biomass, and energy. In this video, we will cover pyramids of numbers and biomass only. Food pyramids are also called ecological pyramids. A pyramid of numbers shows the number of organisms found at each trophic level in a food chain. The width of each bar is representative of the number of organisms at that trophic level. Let's look at the example in the picture, which represents a simple food chain in an ecosystem. The grass is eaten by a vole, which in turn is eaten by an owl. Now let's turn this food chain into a pyramid of numbers as this is something that you may be asked to do in an exam. We start by drawing our pyramid with each bar representing a trophic level. Note that you do not need to draw pictures in your pyramid. The bottom bar will always be the producer, so in this case the grass will be here. The next bar will usually be less wide than the bottom bar, as this represents the primary consumer, which in this case is the vole. The top bar of our pyramid will represent the secondary consumer, which is the owl. You may be asked to draw your pyramid on graph paper in an exam, so be sure to pick a suitable scale when drawing your bars to accurately reflect the relative numbers at each trophic level. Next we need to add our numbers in. So if 8 grass plants were eaten by 3 voles, which in turn were eaten by 1 owl, in the food chain, our completed pyramid would look like this. Keep in mind that in some cases a pyramid of numbers will not have a pyramid shape, such as when there are several insects feeding off one large tree. A pyramid of biomass shows the dry mass of the organisms at each trophic level. This may be expressed as the mass per surface area, such as grams per square meter. A pyramid of biomass will always have a pyramid shape because the biomass at each trophic level decreases as you move up the food chain. This makes it a more accurate representation of the quantity of plant and animal material at each level of a food chain, as well as the interdependence between different trophic levels. In this exam-style question, you are given a table containing information about the biomass found at each trophic level in a food web, and you must use this to complete the pyramid of biomass. The first thing we need to do is to calculate the scale that was used. Let's look at the bar representing the producers. We can see that the bar is 48 squares wide, and this represents a biomass of 960 grams per square meter. That means that each small block represents 20 grams per square meter. The next step is using the scale to draw the bars for the secondary and tertiary consumers accurately. This means the bar for the secondary consumers should be 12 squares wide, while the width of the bar representing the tertiary consumers would be 4 squares wide. Lastly, ensure that you have labeled each bar correctly. So in summary, food pyramids show the ecological relationship between organisms of different trophic levels in a food chain. A pyramid of numbers represents the number of organisms at each trophic level and is not always pyramid shaped. A pyramid of biomass shows the dry mass of the organisms at each trophic level and is a more accurate representation of the interdependence within a food chain. Don't forget to check out all our other fantastic revision resources here.
Okay, so we're back here. So in the pyramid, we have, like we said, we have different types of pyramid, right? A pyramid is just an ecological relationship of the food chain in our environment. So we say we have 3 types. We have pyramid of numbers, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. Okay, for IGCSE, is mostly what is covered is the pyramid of numbers and pyramid of biomass. Pyramid of energy, we can talk about it a little while, okay, also. So first of all, pyramid of number. A pyramid of number is just the number of, or how many organisms are taking place in the different trophic level. How many organisms are in the different trophic level of the food chain. It's just, but it's not the actual representation. It's not the actual representation. It's just showing the number. Say how many organisms we're talking about in each of the levels in the food chain. Now the width of the box indicates the number of organisms at the trophic level. The width, how long, or the width of the box, the width, okay, not the length of the box. The width of the box shows the number of organisms that you have in that particular trophic level. For example, let's consider the following food chain, okay? If you take a look at this, you have the grasses is eaten by mouse is eaten by owl, okay? This is the energy transfer. The arrow is showing the energy transfer. Now, we have a food chain which shows the transfer of energy, right? So we ask ourselves, how many plants do we can see there are more plants, right? Obviously more plants. We can model maybe 8, 10, whatever numbers, okay? Because obviously there are more plants. Okay, let's assume there are 8 plants here. So we're going to model that, and there are 3 mouse. eating grasses only. There are 3 mouse eating grasses, and there's only 1 owl that is hunting the mouse. So this is what we show. You can see the width. The width for this one, the width is bigger. Lots of grasses plants, right? Because it's 8 more grasses. This is pyramid of numbers. Okay, the width is bigger. Okay, because there are more grasses. And then we have the width of this one is less than the width of the other one. So because there are only 3 mouse that are eating grasses. And then we have the width of this one, like the one you call the height. Okay, I'm talking about the one you call the height for each of the rectangle. Okay, so the width of this one is smaller than the width of this one. It's smaller the width of the house because there's only 1 owl that is devouring these three vole or what you call the mouse. So this is what we mean by the number is represented by the width of the bar. The number is represented by the width. So because there are 8 here, you can see this width, or what you call the height here of this bar, is bigger than this one, and this one is bigger than this one. So in pyramid of number, we draw all of them like this, but we show how much by the height of the bar or the width of the bar. Okay, so this is called the pyramid of numbers. This is called the pyramid of numbers. You can see in this case, if we go to another one which is called despite the name and the example above, a pyramid of number does it always have to be pyramid shape? It doesn't always have to be pyramid shape. It can be like this. It can be like this. Okay, it can be like this. So probably maybe we're looking at one plant which is the producer, oak tree, and then we have insects that are eating from it. Maybe the insects are more, the primary consumer, the insects are more that are eating from this. And but what is important, what is significant is that you can see the height. You can see the height of you can see that meaning there are more grasses or there are more oak trees. The height of the bar. So you see here the primary consumer, the insects that are feeding on the grasses, and then you see the woodpecker, the secondary consumer, the woodpecker that are eating the insect. So a pyramid of number can also be like this, can also be given like this. Pyramid of numbers are not always pyramid shape. They can be in this shape. They can be in this type of shape. Okay, so this is because the size of the organism is also important. The size of the organism is also important. One large organism like the oak tree in the pyramid above contains enough energy to support many smaller organisms like the insect. Only one oak tree, this one probably one oak tree, has enough energy that can contain so many of these insects. And so many of these insects will be consumed by only one woodpecker. So not all the time we have pyramid of number in the pyramid form. Pyramid of number can be in this also format that is not in the pyramid form. Now let's take a look at the rules to note when we're drawing the pyramid of numbers. You cannot change the trophic level of the organism. You cannot begin to say, okay, let me put mouse first and then I put the plant here or I put the plant on top. No, it's not possible. It's always from the producer to the primary consumer, to the secondary consumer, to tertiary consumer, depending on the number of organisms in the level, in each of the different trophic level. So that's the first rule. You cannot change the trophic level of the organisms. That's the first one. They must stay in the same order as in the food chain. They must stay in the same order as in the food chain with the producer on the bottom. Okay? Producer must be at the bottom of the pyramid, followed by the primary consumer, followed by secondary consumer, followed by tertiary, quaternary, and so on and so forth. Then that's the first one. Generally, the larger an individual, an organism is, the less of them there are. The larger it is, the less you have in the system, in the ecosystem. For example, if you have a very big oak tree, obviously when we're representing, we're just saying many insects are feeding on that one oak tree. So the larger it is, the less of them we have. Now let's go to the second type of pyramid, which is called the pyramid of biomass. Okay, so we are through with pyramid of numbers, just using number to represent the different trophic level. How many organisms you have to represent the different trophic level. Okay, so in pyramid of number, biomass, a pyramid of biomass shows how much mass the creature at each level has. Okay, dry mass. We're talking about the dry mass. Here we're talking about the mass of the organism, not the number of the organism. You may have 20 organisms, their kg is just 20 kg. You may have one organism has 1000 kg. In this case, pyramid of biomass, we're looking at the dry mass of each of the organisms. We're looking at the dry mass of each of the organisms in their various trophic level. We're looking at the dry mass of each of the organisms in their various trophic level. Pyramid of biomass are always pyramid shape. They are always pyramid shape, always because there are more grasses or more trees and they're bigger, the mass is bigger usually, okay, and then there will be a lot of snail eating grasses, so many snail eating grasses, okay, and if you put them together, the mass of them will be more than a few thrush which are secondary consumers that are eating the snakes. And if you put the sparrow hawk together, they are fewer than the hawk or the thrush that are eating the snake. So it's always in pyramid form, because here we're looking at the mass of the organism in this state. So if they ask you about pyramid of biomass, is the dry mass representation in the various trophic level, and they must always be in the trophic level. So with this, we come to the end of this first section. Thank you for joining us.